Carl Jung discovered that there's a moment when everything changes between a narcissist and an empath. The moment the empath learns to speak the narcissist's unspoken language, not their words, but their psychological patterns, their manipulative tactics, their emotional strategies. And when this happens, Jung observed something fascinating. The narcissist realizes they've lost control. Picture this moment. You've finally decoded their silent treatments, their guilt trips, their charm offensives. You can predict their moves before they make them. Most importantly, you've stopped reacting the way they expect. The hooks that once pulled you into their drama now bounce off harmlessly. This is what I call shadow literacy, and Jung understood that it creates a dangerous moment. Because when a narcissist realizes you can see through their games, they either escalate dramatically or disappear entirely. But there's something even more important that Jung discovered about what this awakening means for your psychological freedom. The narcissist's reaction to losing control isn't random. It follows patterns Jung identified that reveal the deepest truths about both manipulation and liberation. But here's what Jung understood about this moment that changes everything. The narcissist's language was never really about communication. It was about what I call psychological territory control. Every conversation, every interaction, every emotional exchange was designed to establish their dominance over your inner landscape. Jung wrote, "Where love reigns, there is no will to power, and where the will to power is paramount, love is lacking." The narcissist operates entirely from will to power, which is why their relationships feel so exhausting. You're not connecting with a person. You're navigating a control system. When you learn to decode this system, something profound shifts. You stop taking their behavior personally because you recognize it as mechanical. Their rage isn't about you, it's about losing control. Their charm isn't genuine attraction, it's strategic manipulation. Their silent treatment isn't hurt feelings, it's psychological punishment designed to bring you back in line. Jung understood that this recognition is the beginning of what he called individuation, becoming psychologically independent from others' unconscious patterns. But he also warned that this awakening comes with a cost. The narcissist won't simply accept your new awareness. They'll fight to reclaim the territory they've lost, and that's where things get dangerous. Jung spent decades studying what he called psychological projections, and he discovered that narcissists operate through a specific linguistic code that most people never consciously recognize. What I call the manipulation grammar, a systematic way of controlling reality through language, emotion, and strategic behavior. Here's how Jung would decode their language. When they say you're being too sensitive, they're really saying, "Stop responding to my manipulation in ways that make me look bad." When they give you the silent treatment, they're communicating, "I'm withdrawing my approval until you submit to my control." When they suddenly shower you with affection after mistreating you, they're saying, "I need to reset your nervous system so you'll tolerate more abuse." Jung wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." But narcissists don't allow transformation. They create what I call false chemistry, reactions that seem intimate but are actually calculated to produce specific responses in you. The moment you learn to translate their behavior, instead of just experiencing it, everything changes. You stop feeling crazy because their contradictions start making perfect sense. They're not contradictory, they're strategic. Every hot and cold cycle, every guilt trip, every sudden burst of rage serves the same function, maintaining psychological control. But here's where Jung's insight becomes crucial. Learning this language doesn't just protect you from them, it forces you to confront uncomfortable truths about yourself. Why were you susceptible to this manipulation in the first place? What psychological wounds made you vulnerable to their control strategies? Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The darkness isn't just in the narcissist. It's in the parts of yourself that needed their approval, feared their abandonment, or mistook intensity for intimacy. If you finally recognized the patterns and stopped taking their behavior personally, comment, I see the game now. This is why learning the narcissist's language is so transformative. You're not just decoding their manipulations. You're discovering your own psychological blueprint. The wounds that made you an easy target, the needs that made you vulnerable, the fears that kept you trapped. Jung understood that when an empath becomes conscious of these patterns, it creates what I call the recognition crisis for the narcissist. Their entire psychological structure depends on operating below the radar of conscious awareness. They need you to experience their manipulations as genuine emotions, not strategic behaviors. Jung wrote, "The greatest danger is that one may get stuck in the unconscious and never come back to reality. But the narcissist's greatest fear is the opposite, that others will become conscious and see reality clearly, because once you see their patterns, you can't unsee them. This is why they react so violently when they sense you've learned their language. It's not just about losing control over you. It's about losing their ability to control their own self-image. As long as you reacted unconsciously to their manipulations, they could tell themselves they were just being emotional, just having relationship difficulties, just misunderstood. But when you respond with calm awareness to their rage, when you don't chase them during their silent treatments, when you don't get hooked by their guilt trips, you become a mirror, reflecting back their true nature. And Jung understood that most narcissists would rather destroy the mirror than face what it shows them. This creates what I call escalation desperation. They will try harder versions of all their old tactics, the silent. Treatments get longer. The rage gets more intense. The guilt trips become more elaborate. They're not becoming worse people. They're revealing how desperate they've always been to maintain control. Jung wrote, "The healthy man does not torture others. Generally, it is the tortured who turn into torturers." The narcissist's escalation is proof of their inner torture, but understanding this doesn't mean you should stay and try to heal them. It means you should recognize that their behavior was never about you. It was always about their own psychological prison. But here's where many empaths make a crucial mistake. They think understanding the narcissist's language means they can somehow use it to create healthier communication. Jung would warn against this thinking. You cannot use the tools of manipulation to create authentic connection. The moment you start playing their language games, even with good intentions, you begin to lose yourself. The goal isn't to become fluent in manipulation. It's to become immune to it through conscious awareness. Jung made a profound observation about what happens when someone learns to recognize psychological manipulation. They face what I call the dark mirror temptation, the urge to use these insights for control rather than liberation. When you finally understand how the narcissist operates, you might discover you can predict their moves, trigger their insecurities, or push their buttons just as effectively as they once pushed yours. This newfound power can feel intoxicating after years of feeling helpless. But Jung warned that this is the most dangerous phase of the awakening process. Jung wrote, "The pendulum of the mind oscillates between sense and nonsense, not between right and wrong." When you learn the narcissist's language, your mind might swing from victim consciousness to predator consciousness. Both are unconscious positions. Both keep you trapped in their psychological field. The temptation is subtle but powerful. You might find yourself using their own tactics against them, giving them silent treatments when they misbehave, using guilt trips to get them to change their behavior, withholding affection until they treat you better. You tell yourself you're just setting boundaries, but Jung would recognize this as shadow possession, becoming the very thing you once feared. Jung wrote, "A man who has not passed through the inferno of his passions has never overcome them." The inferno for empaths isn't just surviving the narcissist's manipulations. It's not becoming manipulative themselves in response. It's learning to hold power without wielding it destructively. This is where what I call shadow literacy becomes crucial. True mastery isn't about learning to manipulate the manipulator. It's about recognizing manipulation so clearly that you no longer feel compelled to engage with it at all. You don't need to punish them, outsmart them, or teach them a lesson. You just need to protect yourself and move toward healthier connections. Comment if you felt the temptation to use their tactics against them. I almost became what I feared. Jung understood that this temptation is actually a sign of healing. It means you're no longer identifying as a victim. But the goal isn't to become the perpetrator. It's to step off the victim-perpetrator cycle entirely, to become someone who can see manipulation clearly without needing to participate in it. The narcissist language is like a virus. Learning to recognize it gives you immunity, but getting too fascinated with how it works can infect you with its patterns. The key is developing what Jung called conscious detachment, understanding without absorption. Jung identified what he called the transcendent function, the psychological process that allows us to hold opposing forces in tension until something new emerges. For empaths recovering from narcissistic relationships, this means holding both compassion and boundaries, understanding and detachment, love and self-protection. When you truly master the narcissist's language, something remarkable happens. You stop needing to use it. You don't have to decode every manipulation, analyze every interaction, or prepare for every possible tactic. You develop what I call intuitive immunity, an automatic recognition system that operates below conscious awareness. Jung wrote, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." The real awakening isn't about becoming an expert on narcissistic behavior. It's about understanding why you were vulnerable to it in the first place. This inward journey reveals uncomfortable truths. Maybe you were raised by narcissistic parents and learned to equate love with chaos. Maybe you developed what Jung called wounded healer syndrome, believing your worth came from fixing others. Maybe you had unhealed trauma that made intensity feel like intimacy. Jung understood that these wounds aren't character flaws. They're information. They show you exactly where your psychological work needs to focus. The narcissist was like an X-ray machine, revealing all the fractures in your sense of self-worth, your ability to set boundaries, your capacity to trust your own perceptions. But here's where Jung's insight becomes liberating. Once you see these patterns clearly, you can heal them, consciously. You can develop what I call authentic boundaries, limits based on your values, rather than reactions to their behavior. You can cultivate internal validation, self-worth that doesn't depend on others' approval. You can practice emotional sovereignty, feeling your emotions fully without being controlled by them. The narcissist taught you their language by forcing you to become fluent in manipulation, gaslighting, and control. But your recovery involves learning an entirely different language, the language of healthy relationships, authentic communication, and genuine intimacy. Jung wrote, "The shoe that fits one person pinches another." There is no recipe for living that suits all cases. What works in a relationship with a narcissist? Hypervigilance, people-pleasing, emotional management will sabotage relationships with healthy people. You have to consciously unlearn the survival strategies that kept you safe in toxicity. This is why recovery takes time. You're not just leaving a bad relationship. You're learning to speak an entirely different emotional language, one based on truth rather than strategy, vulnerability rather than manipulation, genuine care rather than transactional exchange. If you've started attracting healthier people since learning these patterns, comment, "My energy shifted, and so did my connections." Jung observed that when someone becomes immune to psychological manipulation, it triggers what I call control system collapse in the manipulator. The narcissist experiences something they've never had to face, the complete ineffectiveness of their primary coping mechanisms. This creates a profound crisis for them because their entire identity is built on their ability to control others' perceptions and reactions. Jung wrote, "The world will ask you who you are, and if you don't know, the world will tell you." The narcissist has always let their effect on others tell them who they are. When that effect disappears, they face an identity void. This is why they often escalate so dramatically when they realize you've learned their language. They're not just losing you, They're losing their sense of self. Their rage isn't really about your behavior. It's about the existential terror of being seen clearly and found wanting. Jung understood that this moment reveals the narcissist's core wound, the shame they've spent their entire lives avoiding, their grandiosity, their need for control, their manipulation tactics. All of it exists to protect them from feeling the inadequacy they've carried since childhood. When you stop reacting to their provocations, stop chasing during their withdrawals, stop accepting blame for their projections, you force them to experience the very feelings they've built, their entire personality to avoid. This is why some narcissists become genuinely dangerous when they lose control. They're facing psychological annihilation. But here's what Jung would want you to understand. This crisis isn't your responsibility to fix. You didn't cause their wounds and you can't heal them. Your job is to protect yourself from the fallout of their psychological collapse. The narcissist may go through several predictable phases when they realize they've lost control. First comes escalation, bigger manipulations, more extreme behaviors, attempts to pull you back into the drama. Then comes false enlightenment, sudden claims of self-awareness, promises to change, temporary improvements designed to regain your trust. Next is replacement shopping, quickly finding someone new to control, often while trying to make you jealous or feel you've been easily replaced. Finally comes reality distortion, rewriting history to make themselves the victim, spreading lies about you to others, creating elaborate narratives where you're the abuser. Jung wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, in order to avoid facing their own soul." The narcissist's behavior during this crisis isn't about you. It's about their desperate attempt to avoid confronting their authentic self. Understanding this pattern protects you from taking their reactions personally. Their escalation isn't proof that you're hurting them. It's proof that you're no longer allowing them to hurt you. Their attempts to replace you aren't evidence of your inadequacy. They're evidence of their inability to exist without someone to control. Your immunity to their language has forced them into what Jung called the dark night of the soul. But while this might sound cruel, it's actually the only chance they have for genuine healing, if they choose to take it. Jung discovered something paradoxical about psychological freedom. The moment you no longer need to understand someone's manipulation tactics is the moment you've truly mastered them, what I call the freedom paradox. You gain immunity to narcissistic abuse by becoming indifferent to understanding it. This represents a profound shift in consciousness. Instead of constantly analyzing their behavior, predicting their moves, or preparing for their tactics, you simply stop caring what they do. Not because you've become cold or uncaring, but because you've become centered in yourself. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." When you're secure in your authentic identity, others' attempts to manipulate that identity lose all power. You're no longer seeking validation from them, fearing their abandonment, or needing their approval. This creates what I call psychological invulnerability. Not because you can't be hurt, but because you're no longer vulnerable to their specific type of harm. Their silent treatments can't punish you if you enjoy solitude. Their guilt trips can't control you if you're comfortable with disappointing them. Their rage can't intimidate you if you're not afraid of their emotions. But here's where the freedom becomes challenging. You may find yourself grieving the connection you thought you had. Jung understood that even toxic relationships provide a form of intensity that can feel like aliveness. When you step out of the drama, life might initially feel quiet, empty, or boring. Jung wrote, "The most intense conflicts, if overcome, leave behind a sense of security and calm that is not easily disturbed. This calm is your natural state, but after years of chaos, it can feel strange. You might even find yourself missing the emotional roller coaster, the high-stakes drama, the feeling of being needed, even if toxically. This is why many empaths cycle back into narcissistic relationships. They mistake peace for emptiness, mistake drama for passion, mistake chaos for connection. Jung would say this is the final test of your liberation. Can you tolerate the quiet joy of healthy relationships after the addictive intensity of toxic ones? The freedom paradox means accepting that healthy love feels different from traumatic bonding. It's steadier but less dramatic, more peaceful but less urgent, more authentic but less intense. It requires learning to find aliveness in stability rather than crisis. Jung wrote, "We are not what happened to us, we are what we wish to become." Your recovery involves consciously choosing who you want to be rather than unconsciously reacting to what was done to you. This choice, repeated daily, creates genuine freedom. Comment if you've learned to find peace more interesting than drama. I choose calm over chaos now. Jung believed that the highest form of psychological development was what he called the union of opposites, the ability to hold contradictory truths without being torn apart by them. For empaths recovering from narcissistic abuse, this means integrating both your capacity for deep empathy and your need for strong boundaries. This integration creates what I call conscious empathy, the ability to feel with others without losing yourself in their experience. You can recognize someone's pain without feeling responsible for fixing it. You can understand someone's behavior without excusing their impact. You can have compassion without sacrificing your self-protection. Jung wrote, "The acceptance of oneself is the essence of the whole moral problem and the epitome of a whole outlook on life. This acceptance includes acknowledging the parts of yourself that were vulnerable to manipulation, not to shame yourself, but to heal those wounds consciously. Maybe you discover you have a savior complex that made you susceptible to people who needed fixing. Maybe you recognize abandonment fears that made you tolerate unacceptable behavior. Maybe you see codependent patterns that made you confuse enmeshment with intimacy. These insights aren't character attacks, they're roadmaps to freedom. The integrated empath develops what Jung called active imagination, the ability to consciously engage with their own psychological patterns, instead of being unconsciously controlled by them. When you feel the old urge to fix someone, you can recognize it as a trauma response rather than genuine care. When you feel attracted to chaotic intensity, you can identify it as familiar dysfunction rather than true connection. This consciousness allows you to make different choices. You can feel the pull of old patterns without being controlled by them. You can recognize manipulation without needing to confront it. You can have boundaries without becoming rigid or closed off. Jung understood that this level of integration is rare because it requires holding multiple perspectives simultaneously. You must be strong enough to protect yourself while remaining open enough for genuine connection, discerning enough to recognize manipulation while compassionate enough to understand the wounds behind it. The mastery isn't about becoming invulnerable. It's about becoming consciously vulnerable only with people who've earned that trust through consistent, healthy behavior. Jung wrote, "Thinking is difficult, that's why most people judge. But the integrated person can think clearly about others' behavior without judging their essential worth. You learn to evaluate people's actions while maintaining compassion for their struggles. You can set boundaries with someone without needing to demonize them. You can protect yourself without becoming defensive or reactive. This is emotional maturity. The ability to be fully yourself while allowing others to be fully themselves, even when those selves are incompatible with your well-being." Jung observed that individual psychological healing creates collective transformation. When you become immune to manipulation, you don't just protect yourself, you model what authentic strength looks like for everyone around you. What I call the authenticity ripple. Your healing gives others permission to heal too. People notice when you stop participating in toxic dynamics. They see that you can be kind without being weak, that you can have boundaries without being cruel, that you can be empathetic without being exploitable. This challenges their unconscious assumptions about what relationships should look like. Jung wrote, "Everyone you meet knows something you don't know, but need to know. Learn from them." But the reverse is also true. Everyone you meet can learn something from your journey towards psychological freedom. Your refusal to engage with manipulation shows others that they don't have to engage with it either. Children especially benefit from witnessing adults who don't accept abusive behavior. Instead of learning that love requires sacrifice of self, They see that healthy love enhances both people. They learn that boundaries are acts of self-care, not selfishness. They discover that manipulation isn't normal, it's a sign of dysfunction. Your workplace culture shifts when you stop enabling others' manipulative behaviors. You demonstrate that competence doesn't require tolerating abuse, that professionalism can include emotional boundaries, that success doesn't depend on sacrificing your mental health. Even casual interactions transform when you operate from this new consciousness. You stop making excuses for people's poor behavior. You don't automatically assume responsibility for others' emotions. You respond to manipulation with calm clarity rather than reactive defensiveness. Jung understood that society heals one conscious individual at a time. Each person who refuses to participate in unconscious patterns creates space for others to make healthier choices. Your immunity to the narcissist's language becomes a gift to everyone who interacts with you. But Jung also warned that this transformation can be isolating. When you stop participating in collective unconsciousness, you might feel different from others who are still operating from old patterns. This loneliness is temporary. As you heal, you attract others who are also committed to conscious living. The most profound ripple effect is what I call energy signature change. Your entire energetic presence shifts from reactive to responsive, from defensive to grounded, from needy to whole. This attracts completely different people into your life, while naturally repelling those who need someone to manipulate. Jung understood that learning the narcissist's language is just the beginning of a much larger journey towards psychological sovereignty. What matters isn't just recognizing manipulation, it's consistently choosing conscious responses over unconscious reactions. This consciousness requires daily practice. Every interaction becomes an opportunity to choose authenticity over people-pleasing, truth over peacekeeping, self-protection over self-sacrifice. These might seem like small choices, but Jung knew that transformation happens through accumulating moments of conscious decision-making. Jung wrote, "You are what you do, not what you say you'll do." Your recovery becomes real through consistent action, not through understanding or insight alone. Each time you maintain a boundary despite pressure, each time you refuse to engage with manipulation, each time you choose your well-being over someone else's comfort, you strengthen your psychological immunity. The conscious choice also means accepting that some people will never appreciate your growth. Those who benefited from your old patterns, your people-pleasing, your emotional management, your willingness to accept blame, may resist your transformation. Jung would say this resistance is information about the health of those relationships. Healthy people celebrate your boundaries because they make authentic connection possible. Unhealthy people resist your boundaries because they make exploitation impossible. Your growth becomes a sorting mechanism, naturally filtering out those who were never truly supportive of your well-being. Jung wrote, In chaos there is a cosmos, in all disorder a secret order. The chaos of narcissistic relationships often contains the seeds of your own liberation. The manipulation that once controlled you becomes the teacher that shows you exactly where your psychological work needs to focus. But this learning comes with responsibility. Once you understand these patterns, you can't claim ignorance when you see them in other relationships. You become accountable for protecting yourself and others from manipulation, to the extent that you're able. The conscious choice means using your hard-won wisdom to create healthier connections, rather than returning to familiar dysfunction. It means trusting the quiet steadiness of authentic love, rather than the addictive intensity of traumatic bonding. It means believing you deserve relationships based on mutual respect, rather than mutual need. Jung believed this consciousness represents human evolution, the development of individuals who can love without losing themselves, connect without compromising their essence, and care without carrying what doesn't belong to them. When the narcissist realizes the empath has learned their language, they're not just losing control over one person, they're confronting the possibility that their entire approach to relationships is fundamentally flawed. But your awakening isn't about them anymore. It's about you reclaiming the psychological territory that was always yours. Jung wrote, "The greatest and most important problems of life are all fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved but only outgrown. You cannot solve the narcissist. You cannot fix the manipulation. You cannot change the dynamics by becoming more skilled at their language. You can only outgrow your need to participate in these patterns. Your journey from unconscious victim to conscious observer to integrated individual represents what Jung called the individuation process, becoming who you truly are beneath all the conditioning, trauma, and adaptation. The narcissist inadvertently became your teacher by showing you exactly which psychological wounds needed healing. Their language, the manipulation, the control, the emotional terrorism, forced you to develop fluency in something far more valuable, the language of your own authenticity. You learned to recognize your real feelings beneath their projections. You discovered your genuine needs beneath their demands. You found your actual voice beneath their silencing. This is why learning their language ultimately sets you free, not because you can manipulate them back, but because you can finally hear yourself clearly. The noise of their chaos no longer drowns out the quiet wisdom of your inner guidance. Every silent treatment taught you to value your own company. Every guilt trip showed you where your boundaries needed strengthening. Every manipulation revealed another way you were abandoning yourself for their approval. If you want to explore more about reclaiming your authentic power in relationships, check out my video on You'll Stop Pleasing People after this, where we dive deeper into Jung's insights about breaking free from the need for others' approval. Your sensitivity was never your weakness. Learning their language wasn't about becoming like them. It was about becoming immune to what they represent, the unconscious patterns that keep people trapped in cycles of manipulation and control. You are now fluent in freedom, and that language no one can take from you. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.